Opus, opus, opus. Not quite yet. We're still going to work with the EastWest Hollywood Strings library first. Hi there, this is Sam with Second Tier Sound. Really nice to see you here. So as promised, I will now work through the EastWest Hollywood Strings library so that you will know it really, really well. And you might wonder, what about Opus, the new engine? It's coming out. Isn't that going to change everything? Well, maybe. I'm not entirely sure. I will actually do a review of that library soon. But until then, think about this. This library will still exist. And I also believe that Opus engine won't really change much of the Hollywood strings. It will keep all those samples and add a few new ones. The biggest change might be the naming of the patches. I think that they're going to simplify it a little bit. But all the knowledge in this library will still apply to you. And if you're not upgrading to the No Opus engine for various reasons, then this video will still apply to you. So let's not talk anymore. Let's go through this library right now. So let's look at this library. But before we get going, as always, I remind you of the purge function. Really make sure you know how to use that one. Otherwise, I'll talk about it in a previous video. And please also make sure that you exclude your Play library folders from your antivirus, or the Play engine will be really slow. Okay, so let's look at all these folders. Quick start. Hollywood strings. What is this about? Well, as you might know, some of these patches take a while to load. So they basically gathered all the patches here that are quick to load and quick to play. Then I don't have to go in and look for the perfect violin, blah, blah, blah. Just here. They don't sound bad, but if you want more detail, then these are not the best patches. They're good for quick writing. Template Pro, something I discovered a little bit later when I started to create my own patches. But I started to realize after a while that the patches I have chosen are pretty much identical to everything you find here. So these folders basically include everything, more or less, to 99% all you need to have a complete violin sound with all the articulations you probably ever need. It's a great selection, so you don't have to go search for everything. It's just right there. If you haven't created your own patches, then just use these. They're perfect. Then, depending on the version you have normal, violin, second, basses, cello, and so on, and violas. And depending on the version, you have the Divisi or not. And I will go into detail later what Divisi is, but it's just dividing this section in half. So full players, half the players have pretty much the same articulations and folders. All the instruments have Divisi in this version of the library. Then we have full strings, which is basically sort of patches where you can play all the strings at the same time, which is great for sketching. If you hear my daughter singing in the background there, that's my daughter. She's 1 year old. Hello, hello. Long patches are basically non-legato patches, so you can hit several notes at the same time, and you won't hear any legato transitions between the notes. So at first glance, there's so many. What is this? Well, there is actually a method behind this madness. They really wanted to provide you with all options possible so you can do it the way you like it and kind of control that you want. So in the first one here, and I also wonder sometimes if different people were working on names here because they seem to have different methodology behind some of the names here. Anyway, these first three, 1, 2, 3, are sort of the same patch, but a little bit of variation in the vibrato. So they wanted to show you that by saying NV, 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 VB, RR, NI. Clear, right? No. This stands for non-vibrato. And so why are they writing it 3 times? Well, because first dynamic layer, no vibrato. Second one, still no vibrato. Third one, still no vibrato. And VB, fourth one, vibrato. So depending on what dynamic layer you have vibrato or not. RR is round robin, and that is, I think, for up bow and down bow. So it will alternate back and forth. So each time you hit the key, it will be a little bit different, creating some variety so it doesn't sound the same all the time. And NI is niente, meaning that when the dynamic layer is all the way down, or sometimes expression, you will hear nothing. So if I hit a chord here, see, nothing is heard because niente dynamic layer is all the way down. So let's go up a little bit. There's the sound. And listen carefully, there's no vibrato here. Let's go up in volume. Still no vibrato. Still no vibrato, and there is vibrato. So that way, when I have the loudest, I have vibrato, and on the softer parts, none. And this can be quite good because often when you have chords in the background, sort of a pad going on with the strings, it can interfere too much with the rest of the orchestra if you have a very heavy vibrato. But if you feel like you do want some more of those options, you can always load the next patch, which you see here in the third dynamic layer. There is also a vibrato, so it comes in sooner than the fourth one is the same. And on the third patch, it's a little bit different because there in the third dynamic layer, there is a vibrato. And in the fourth one, it says MV, which stands for molto vibrato, which is a lot of vibrato in Italian. So you can hear it's more intense. So if you want more emotional, intense music, maybe you should choose that one instead. Okay, the next one is détaché, or detached as it means. That is an effect you get when you lift the bow from the string. And it's very good to have because it ends really nicely. It's kind of a short in a way because the note ends on itself. If I hit a chord here, it stops. I can also do shorter myself by lifting the keys. Round robin again gives some variation to up bow, down bow. Then KSFP. They just really tried to make life difficult for you, didn't they? It stands for Keyswitch finger pattern, and it's a bigger discussion that I will talk a little bit more later. But briefly, if you see here down here, they have key switches for 4 different strings. Because as you might know, a violin has 4 strings. It starts on the lower G, then D, and then A, and then E. So you might know that in all the string families, you can play the same note in various different ways because it has 4 strings that are tuned differently and have different thickness. So depending on where you play it, it will sound a little bit different. It will vibrate a little bit different. So it gives you more options in terms of tone, texture, and timbre. And EastWest wanted to give you that option. Most other libraries don't have that option, and there might be a reason for that because it's quite fiddly to deal with. But at least you have the option. Next one is Marcato suspended 9 dynamic layers, round robin and 4th position. Let's start with the 4th position. Well, since these key switch finger patterns have 4 positions, you rightly guessed that this is only the 4th position. So here you can choose. Here you can choose, here you can't. All right. 9 dynamic layers. That means that if you have over 6, if you have more than 6 dynamic layers, you have vibrato control. So now the mod wheel, it would change only the vibrato. So if I have a sound here, mod wheel all the way down, no vibrato. Mod wheel all the way up, vibrato. You see there was no change in volume there. But you did hear a sort of an attack in the beginning, right? That's the marcato. So it's a nice sort of oomph start to the sound, which gives that more power to it. The other ones here have a little bit more softer, smoother start, which is mostly useful. But if you want more, now we're getting in here to the playing, then marcato is really useful for that. Okay, so the remainder here is kind of the same patch, but just in a lot of different ways. And this is where EastWest, I think, went overboard, overkill, I should say. Because you don't need all these options. But I can explain what it means anyway. DB stands for down bow. Here we are up bow. And RR stands for round robin. Alternating between down bow and up bow. Because it is true, if you go down on the bow or up on the bow, it does sound a little bit different. Big enough difference to care? Well, I don't know. I would say the smartest thing is to use the round robin because then you get both. You don't have to worry about which one you're using and you get a little bit of a variation. But what about this? Well, we already know fourth position is always that one. KSFP, well, then you can choose what position you want, right? So you have two options of every patch. 6 dynamic layers, down bow, either fixed one, or you can choose. And that means basically that this has less memory usage, less samples are loaded, right? And this has a more memory usage. So if you want to save on RAM, use this one. But here's my tip. Don't bother with the KSFP. It's not worth it. Okay? Then round robin, same thing. You get an alternating between down bow and up bow, and you have two versions. Then the same thing, just up bow, two versions. Why does it say 9? Well, as I said before, if you go over 6 dynamic layers, you have vibrato control. So on these with 6, when you move the dynamic layer, the mod wheel that is up and down, you will get a volume change and a vibrato change, but you can't control it independently. Here, on the 9 dynamic layers, you do have vibrato control. So the mod wheel will only control the vibrato, not the volume. You have to control that with the expression layer, which is CC11. So a lot of stuff for just having different control. Let's look at the long, powerful system. So this sounds like, wow, here are the good sounds. Here, everything sounds amazing here. Sort of. The real difference is actually how many resources this patch is using. You can see here it has 13 dynamic layers. Otherwise, it's the same idea. Down bow, 4th position, or Keyswitch finger position. Round robin means to have down bow and up bow included. So it's basically just more loaded into memory. But the quality is still the same. I've actually never felt that the powerful system folder sounds way better or gives me so many more options. So a pro tip from me is to really not bother with this folder at all. It just doesn't really make any sense. It will save you a lot of time and some RAM. Maybe if you're just using a patch for a piece of music and you really want to make sure you have everything, then maybe. But otherwise, if you're going to use these patches for a whole orchestra, you're going to need a lot of RAM. So the short ones, and obviously there are 2 just to make life easier for you. So these folders are actually pretty much identical, but the samples included in them are different. How? Well, in the tight folder, they have cut off the beginning transients or the beginning part of the samples so that when you hit a key, it just feels more like the sound comes immediately, making it easier to be right on time. While in the loose one, the transients and the beginning samples are included, so it will sound a little bit like the sound comes a little bit later after you hit the key. Now, we're not talking a lot here, we're talking a few milliseconds, but still, it's enough to feel a little bit clunky sometimes when you try to be rhythmic. I still prefer it, and I can always adjust it later, or I can even adjust the track delay here. So they have the same samples. I think there's maybe one silly little difference there, but otherwise they're exactly the same. So let's look at the short loose. And we have a folder even in here. So let's look at the mod combos first. And these are great. Let's load up the first one here. First, violins, shorts, mod speed, loose. LS stands for loose, so you don't forget that's what it is. So now with the mod wheel, I control how long the samples are or what kind of samples. So we can look at the player. Here we have them all, staccatissimo, staccato, staccato on bow, and marcato short. So the first one, if I have the mod wheel all the way down, is a staccatissimo. And I control the dynamic layer with how hard I hit the keys. I can obviously use the expression layer as well for more control. Okay, so if I go up a little bit with the mod wheel, I have a staccato, which is a little bit longer than staccatissimo. Staccatissimo, staccato. And then I have staccato on bow, which I struggled to hear the difference, to be honest, but technically it means that the bow is now hitting the strings instead. And then we have marcato short. And what's beautiful about this one, well, they all work this way, is that it kind of works as a legato as well. But not really, because you can have long notes, But if you play nice, pretty fast lines, there are legato transitions and they work really well together. So this patch is really, truly great. You can create most of what you need just with this patch alone. Well, you might want to include a legato or a long, but otherwise it's really good to create great melody lines with. And then obviously, if you're good at performing, which I might not be here, you can always swap while you record. And then you can also do chords, obviously. Let's look at the other ones here. Well, I would say this one is basically the only one you need. The difference here is that these use less RAM because they load less samples. And if you know that you're only going to use spiccato and marcato, then load that one instead. And it's easier to control because here you have 4 layers to control. It might be difficult to be exact. Yeah. And here the same staccato and marcato and stack slur. I can load this one. Stack slur is kind of a run almost. If you play fast passages, it has nice transition between the notes. Also, all of these patches here are great for arpeggios. So again, these have all of them. This one has all of them. These have specific ones. So it's easier to control if you know what you want and save some RAM. Let's go back to the other ones that are outside this folder. Then we have a Bartok pizzicato. It's when you you lift the string so it slams against the violin. So you get that percussive effect. Named from the composer Bela Bartok, who I think he was the one who invented it. But anyway, that's what they're called. Then collegno is when you move the bow upside down and hit it on the strings and you get a very strange sound. Sounds almost like a pizzicato. Then you have a marcato short, which you have in the mod combo. But if you only want that one, it's here. Round robin stands for how many versions. So if I hit 4 times, I will get a little bit different sample each time. It's very subtle, but it does make a difference. That would be the same sample. It would sound too robotic. Okay, so pizzicato, it's a good one because you don't get that in the mod wheel. So really like this one. It sounds very good. As an ensemble, it sounds very good. Ricochet is when you bounce the bow on your string. Spiccato, you have that in the mod combos, but you might have a little bit more dynamic layers here so you can be more precise. Or rather, you have 9 round robins, so you can really do repetitions. Then we have stack on bow, which is all these stack and stack slur. You have them in the mod combos. It's just that here you can load them yourself. What's great maybe about this one is that it has 14 round robin layers, so you can really do repetitions. And then staccatissimo here. We can look at Stackler again. It wasn't in mod combo, but you know. So you could say here are all the patches with a little bit more detail. And if you just want to load one, then use the mod combos. So let's go into effects. And don't think this is just a bunch of weird effects. This is a very useful folder. Specifically runs. First we have the playable runs. And let's start with the first violin's repetition runs script. Really good for simple runs up and down. it sounds a little bit better when you program it in, but it actually is really, really good. The only thing you have to remember is that you can't hold a note in because the script makes it sound like some kind of repetitions, which sounds good on its own, but it doesn't follow your tempo, so you can't really use it for that. So you have to sort of end quickly. But it works really good. Then we have the slur runs, which kind of works. It just has one problem, the beginning. Listen. Do you hear that? The sample was almost cut in the beginning. Once you play, it's fine. Maybe if you smooth it in with the expression layer, you can mask that sound, but otherwise, I find it a big problem. Otherwise, what's good about this one is that it's not as wild as the first one. It's a little smoother. And then you have Spic Runs Light and Spic Runs. This one has a lot of problems. There's a lot of scripting problems that I won't go into. There's artifacts, there's tones missing. It behaves differently depending what you do. It doesn't make any sense. But the one that is really good is the first violin Spic Runs Smooth, which is a really good patch. It has a lot going for it. First of all, it has more of a spiccato sound, so each note is a little bit more discernible. Another thing is that it has long notes that you can control the vibrato of. So depending on where I have the mod wheel, I can control the vibrato. The other ones are not controlled by anything except expression layer. This one has a vibrato layer and expression. And thirdly, it is controlled by velocity. So if I play a figure, then you can mark different notes a little bit and give an attack in different figures, which is really, really powerful. So which one should you use? I say for normal runs up and down, this one is really good for that. And this one for more arpeggios and patterns, where you want more control of the attacks. This one is really, really nice for that. You could try this one for a little bit smoother runs, but the start has a problem. So let's look at the pre-recorded runs. And here I think it just doesn't work. Listen. So if you listen carefully, you will hear that there's a lot of pops and it's garbled and it kind of sounds distorted. So it doesn't really work. And it makes me wonder if it's just the patch that is very old or it's the play engine. But I don't think it's a play engine because other samples that are using this technology works a lot better in other libraries, for example. So I don't know, maybe it's supposed to be a specific tempo, but it doesn't say either. Or maybe you can just hide them in the background and then nobody will notice. But it doesn't sound that good. And you don't have too many options. You have ottava, major, minor, and whole tone. But you do have the playable runs. And in fact, I think they're better. And not only that, you have more options. You can decide the length of the run. You can have different modes and scales and patterns and rhythms. So it's much more powerful. And it sounds really good. I'm really impressed with it. In fact, I don't know of any other library who has done this. So what are the differences here if you're interested? Well, each section has a few ways of controlling it. Ottava run down, yeah? And then up and down. So by a key switch, you can choose which one. Then the same patch, but you choose with the mod wheel. Then the same patch, but you can choose it while the keyboard is split up, so the left is one and the right is another one. And then you have only up and on it goes. So it's just a bunch of different ways of controlling the same patch. My suggestion is skip this one entirely. Use the playable runs, but that's up to you. Okay, and then they have two very interesting ones that are very useful. Measured tremolo, time stretch, niente, and violence repetitions, time stretch. They're almost the same. And I wonder a little bit why they are both here, because the only difference for me is the sound. They're both time stretched. So that means if I load this one, and for some reason, this is the slowest loading patch in the library. I don't know why. Listen. So it follows my tempo. If I change the tempo in the DAW, it will follow that tempo and sync perfectly. So it's a measured tremolo, right? But it's still rhythmical. So it's not really just a tremolo. If I use this one, repetitions, it sounds pretty much the same. It's just a little bit different sound for some reason. So it's a little bit cleaner, this one. So if you want, nice repetitions, then use this one. Okay, the normal tremolo and then normal trills, whole tone and half tone. So let's look at Keyswitch, which I don't use myself. It might be really nice. It loads fairly quickly. It might be a good way to get started. You have most of the samples that you need to just get a sketch out. So it might be a good sketch patch for you. I don't use it because I find there's a lot of patches I'm not so interested in. But, it covers the basic absolutely. If you're into key switches, then by all means, use this one. Let's look at the legatos. And as you see, it's a lot. So hopefully this will really make it easier for you. The first folder here has the slur and the portamento. What is the difference between slur and portamento? Well, the easy version is to say the length between the transitions. So if I load a patch here that only has the portamento legato, you will hear what it sounds like. If you always use the portamento, it doesn't really work, at least not for faster passages. So in general, I totally skip everything that has only portamento. So you could save some memory if you know that you're only going to use that one, but otherwise I totally skip it. I use the one that says slur plus portamento. So let's load that one. And I'm going to explain what it all means, so don't worry. It says slur plus portamento light 6 dynamic layers. So here, depending on how hard I hit the keys, I have different transitions. So if I hit the keys hard, I get the faster transition, the more normal one, the slur transition. But if I suddenly hit a key light, I get the slower one. So I can combine it. See? So that can be nicer. I like that option way better. Let's talk about the light 6 and the light 12. These are dynamic layers. All the time when there's less or the same as 6, you have no vibrato control. So if I hold a note in, if I move the mod wheel down, I'll lower the volume and the vibrato is the same, or going up the same way. Now, if I load this one here, then the mod wheel is now a vibrato control. So now when I hit the key and I move the mod wheel down, there is no volume change, but I lost the vibrato. Go up again, I get the vibrato. Now, if I want the volume, I have to work with the expression layer instead, which requires you to have more than 2 hands. So this is something you have to program in later. I still prefer the 12 dynamic layers because I do want the vibrato control, because I don't always want the vibrato. If you don't care about that, then load only the 6 dynamic layers because it uses less RAM. So let's look at the other ones. What's the difference here? Well, this one has only the legato slur, and probably is the one you need because unless you want portamento, there's no point in loading those. So you can save some RAM by having just the legato slur, which is the most normal legato there is that works fine. And they even have a really light version here, light 3 dynamic layers, which sounds really good. Just less dynamic layers, but great for quick writing and doesn't use a lot of RAM. And then you have all the options of, round robin and not. So what happens further down? Well, we have something called a marcato. And let's use the legato slur plus portamento because I don't like the only portamento option. So what does this do? Well, on top of the legato has a marcato layer, you could say, which gives more oomph, like almost a stronger attack to the beginning note. So it might be subtle, but if you try the other sample again, you will see that it's a softer attack. This is more, which is good for more motion and more strength. And then we have staccato slur in here, which is also subtle to hear, but it gives a sharper attack again that is shorter. So you can almost do staccato. No, you can't. It's not made for that at all. But you hear it kind of almost works as staccato because that sample is in there. But the benefit of this is to have a little bit different attack and then faster passages. Like that. So it's quite a nice addition as well. So a lot of options, subtle detail, but it gives you the control and the options of your legato. Let's take a look at the legato bow change. What is the main difference between the legato slur and the bow change? Well, a legato slur is when you use your left hand on the fingerboard on the violin. So you move it up and down or you just change notes. But a bow change, you also use the bow up and down, which tends to have a little bit more abrupt change or less smooth. Let's listen to the first one here. We got first violin's legato bow change plus slur plus portamento, 6 dynamic layers. Might be hard to remember what the previous sound was, but it's a little bit less smooth, and this is very good for ostinatos or different figures in the violin. So the slur legato is really good for soaring lines or connected lines, while the bow change is also connected, but it has a little bit more definition, so it suits itself really well to, for example, ostinatos. Okay, so you have the control of what kind of transition. If you hit softer, you get the portamento transition. When there's a plus, you mean you have control of both of them. Okay? 6 means you have no vibrato control. 12, yes, you do have vibrato control. So then it's just a matter of, do I want vibrato control or not? 6 or 12. Do I want control of what upstroke or downstroke? Well, you don't really have control, but with a round robin, you hear both of them switching, alternating every time you hit the key. Okay. And if you don't care about the portamento, then I would just use these here. These are great patches. Just use these here. If you also want the marcato, then you have these, obviously, and the staccato slur. Yeah. Just a recap quickly. Here, which one should I use? I would say always go for the 12. Here we go. That's the most common one with vibrato control. If you don't care about that, 6. If you want even less, 3. They all work fine. Same thing here. I would go with this one here. If you want more control, you just find the one with 12 in these different sections. So now you know. So what about these folders here? Legato slur plus portamento powerful system and legato bow change powerful system. So I would say don't use them, but let's still talk about them. So the main difference is not that they sound much better. They pretty much sound the same. The main difference is actually that they have this Keyswitch finger position included, which give you more options, but it also means you have to use a lot more RAM. There's also one little difference is that they have a few more options. For example, they have a faster portamento if that interests you. They also have something called smooth or SM. And in some cases, they even have they have slower transitions here. But let's just look at this, for example, smooth option here. And I just wanted to show you here again that here are the key switches. And that means that each key there is a string. So for example, if I have a sound here, listen carefully. First string, fourth string. You hear there's a little bit difference there, right? So depending on the thickness of the string, because each string has a different thickness and are also tuned differently, you will get a different sound. So for example, you have on the first string, or you start on the first string rather, and then you start on the fourth. It's a little bit different quality. So you can actually create different moods or emotions with different finger positions, and you can even add different mic positions, and you have a lot of options. But the question is it really worth it to fiddle with all this and figure it out and do several recordings? And most composers I know don't think so. One thing that is interesting in this is the smooth that it says right here. And what it is just a smoother legato transition that is not as obvious as the other ones. Which might be nice if you find that the other one in some cases is too intrusive. Otherwise, you have all you need in these two. Don't think that this is a better sound. It is more options in terms of dynamic layers, which most people don't hear the difference of. It uses more RAM. You also have the option of changing what string you start on. Okay, and then we also have the legacy folder, which I don't use at all, but it's just basically all the patches that were in the previous string library. I forgot what it's called. I think you can still, I don't know if it's the orchestra or the quantum leap, or somebody will tell me what it is. But those samples or those patches are here. They're okay. I think the main difference is that you don't have as many options and that there is no niente. Let's look a little bit at the full strings folder, which is a great sketching tool. It's basically along, just as before, but you have access to the whole string family at once. So not just the violin, but cello, bass. So you can play more like you play on the piano. The only thing you need to make sure is that you have everything set to either Omni or the same MIDI channel, so you can play everything at the same time, because these are actually 4 different instruments loaded at the same time. So the first one here is just basically full strings in the left hand up to C. There it changes into a legato violin. So for example, you can, in the left hand, you can play. It can be a very good sketching tool. Same thing, second violin instead. I just find that it's a little bit louder for some reason. And then here we have the cello is now the solo instrument, and then the strings up in your right hand. See, very good starters to create a mood. It really inspires you. So these are, again, great sketch patches. And then the same thing as the longs, you have, the different dynamic layers here. 3 versions of different kinds of vibrato control, and then tremolo, and then you have full strings, a key switch that controls the trills. We don't have to listen to those. Then short is the same thing. It's kind of nice. You have different kinds of shorts that you can control with a mod. I think it's only 2 versions. So you have either spiccato or marcato. What they have down here is that over the spiccato, there is also a little col legno, which is not super audible, but it makes the attack a little stronger, you can say. So if I have the mod wheel all the way down, and then I just raise the mod wheel. So fast sketching here, really good for that. The other one's the same, you just have spiccato instead on the lower one. And then so you can switch in between there. And then you have a stack slur here, which is an interesting one. That means that you can do fast lines, better to program them in. And then you can still have long marcados there. So that might be good for sketching as well. Let's talk a little bit about the Divisi folder. So you might not have them, but for those who do, I'm just going to explain quickly how it works. You go in here and then you have all the same folders as before. It works the same. There's nothing new here. So let's go in, for example, to Legato. And then you will see that everything has either Divisi A or Divisi B. And if you look at Divisi A here, you can go in and see in the player that is using the close mic only, and it's panned dead center. That means you can make your section smaller. And so if you play 2 notes within a section, it still sounds like the same section, just a full section. It doesn't sound like more players. Otherwise, all these patches are the same. So this library is a little over 10 years older now, and despite its age, it's still quite good. But no library is perfect, so let's talk about those problems just a little bit. Well, the first one is that it's quite massive. It takes up so much space on your hard drive, and the patches are really big, quite taxing on your CPU and your RAM. But EastWest really just wanted to give you everything, all the possibilities, which might seem good on paper, but it also means that it's quite confusing knowing what patch to use. These mic positions, they're not that great. It's a good option. The room they used wasn't very big, so that the differences are very, very subtle. You have to ask yourself, it's worth the trouble to load up more memory. It's not really a great deal. I've also noticed that these envelope controls tend to break the scripts of some legatos. Not always, but quite often. I don't know what it is, but if I load a legato patch and then I just move some of them back and put it in the same position as it originally was put in, something is broken in the legato. It has suddenly pops or weird volume spikes. I have no idea what it's doing that. So I would say stay away from those. I don't know if it was intended for this library and it's just there from the start and it's not really good for this library, but I would say stay away from it. It's also sometimes difficult to work with the legato itself in terms of finding the right transition. You have to really know what patch you have to work with. I know a lot of people complain about the legatos, not like it's terrible, but some people say, I don't know how to get this. And that is number one, you're not using the patch correctly. And, I'm not blaming the people who say that because how would they know? There's so many patches. So you have to sit down and work out what patch does what specifically because it really makes a difference. If you have a keyboard that you can change to fixed velocity, that really helps. Or you can put a fixed velocity in your DAW because when you play it in, it's just a lot easier. So you don't have to worry about all those different kind of legato transitions. Another thing I've noticed also is that tuning can be a problem. I've noticed it the most in the viola. And I think they discovered that because if you load up the viola patch, you notice that they have changed the tuning a little bit here. Maybe it's not the worst thing in the world, but I've noticed on certain notes, certain harmonies, it just sounds a little bit off, and other libraries don't have that problem. Perhaps we should forgive EastWest a little bit for the faults because the library was such a massive undertaking that it's hard to really look at each detail. But the library's been around for so long, and I'm sure people have complained about these issues before. And one thing that I don't understand that just went under the radar is the time stretch samples, like the runs, for example, because they're just not good at all. They're totally garbled and distorted and create a lot of artifacts. So that's it. I really hope you have a thorough or more understanding how this library really works. Despite its age, I really think it's one of the better string libraries out there. If you know how to use the patches, it's just more fun and you can create almost anything with it. Now, obviously the Opus is around the corner and I will make a review of that soon. But I still think that this library will linger and I still think some of the patches will remain, perhaps with a little bit different names. So I think that this will still help you with a new Opus library. Well, let's see. So this is Sam with Second Tier Sound. It was really nice of you to watch this video. If you would like to support me to create more videos like this one, then, hit the like button, make a comment, subscribe. And if you want to do more than that, you can always join my Patreon where you get access to a lot of goodies. So this is Sam. Until next time, take care.